In today's video, we have all the latest NHL rumors focusing on teams like the Calgary Flames, Edmonton Oilers, and Carolina Hurricanes. We have another first-round draft pick for the 2020 entry draft, signing as ELC, and we have the latest updates on the return to play for the 2021 NHL season. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of news and topics to cover today. Let's kick things off with another member of the 2020 NHL draft class getting his entry-level contract out of the way, and it's Buffalo Sabres' first-round pick from the Ottawa 67s, Jack Quinn. Now, Jack Quinn progresses to be here, one of the, potentially at least, one of the top goal scorers from this draft class. Looks like he has a ton of potential. He's going to have an opportunity coming up here to possibly play for Team Canada. He's at their tryout camp right now in Alberta, so we'll see if he gets an opportunity to play on the big stage for Team Canada. That would be a huge development for him. It's debatable if he will. Even though he's a high first-round pick, he's going to have a lot of stiff competition, a lot of players that were even drafted last year. There's going to be more players than usual available since the NHL's not up and running here, including guys like Kirby Dach, for example, who the Hawks said they would make available. Could possibly get guys like Dylan Cousins from the Buffalo Sabres as well. So, he's going to have a lot of competition. But Jack Quinn and the Buffalo Sabres get the entry-level contract here out of the way, so he's officially a member of the organization. So I'm sure for Sabres fans, that's great news. Be interesting to see how this player develops over the next few years as he makes his way to the NHL. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have the latest rumors from around the league on a few teams I want to take a look at. First up, let's look at the Calgary Flames. Now, not too long ago, in the last week or so, we discussed a potential blockbuster trade that was being rumored and discussed between the Calgary Flames and the Boston Bruins, and that information came from Boston Hockey Now, was the source on that one, and they're still reporting that there's still discussions being had around Hanifin. Boston could still very well be in the mix. I think a lot of this kind of started with Hanifin not necessarily being made available by the Flames, but trying to make a hockey trade to move out a left shot D to bring in a right shot D. And of course, the main piece from the Bruins that was rumored to be discussed in that deal was Brandon Carlo. And as I mentioned as well in that video, there was talk that there could be an expanded, larger deal involved with other pieces, such as a possible player like a Jake DeBrusk or a Sam Bennett, or other pieces that could make it a larger, really significant trade for both NHL teams. Now, of course, those talks right now, we don't have any additional information on those talks and those teams, but Boston is still believed to be having some discussions around this, but there are other teams that could be involved here as well, and they're believed to be teams like, for example, the Buffalo Sabres, who could possibly look to trade Brandon Montour. That could accomplish what the Flames are looking for, and again, there could be other pieces involved, but we know Montour's on a one-year deal with the Sabres. He will be an unrestricted free agent next year, get a one-year deal as an RFA, so they walked him right to free agency. He didn't fit the best last year with Ralph Kruger's system, so there's a lot of talk. He won't be in Buffalo too long, at least not likely. If the Sabres are out of the playoffs this year, I would expect him to be moved at the deadline, and he could be one of the top defensemen available at the 2021 NHL trade deadline. So we'll see about that, but that would be another potential destination if Hanifin is indeed moved, if the Flames want to go down this road, because it doesn't look like they really have any interest to bring back Travis Hamonic. I mean, that could be a fallback option, but right now it doesn't appear to be something that's on their radar at all from what we're seeing. Another potential team as well could be a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets too. I mean, Hanifin's got decent term at a good price and could very well be a really solid second pair of defensemen for them. Of course, they have Jones and Werenski. The rumored package going back there would be starting with David Savard, and like I said, there likely would be other pieces involved. I'm not sure a Hanifin for Savard contract swap would be even, given the fact that Hanifin has a lot of term, and David Savard obviously is a little bit older, only has, again, 1 year left like Montour. The Flames would likely want to do an extension or have something in place to make sure that they don't lose the player after 1 year. They're not going to trade a guy with a fair bit of term for 1 year of another guy. That just wouldn't make a lot of good business sense from that perspective. But Hanifin is still out there. No guarantees, of course, that he gets traded, but they're looking to make a hockey move to bring in a different kind of defenseman to play the right side is what the speculation is. And it's kind of all got started with teams contacting Calgary, wondering if Hanifin could be available, likely being Boston, because we know Don Sweeney and the Bruins have seemed to be really after this guy for a long time, really ever since he was drafted. The Bruins have had interest in Noah Hanifin. They want to bring the local boy home. They seem to have a ton of interest in that. Even though, to me, he hasn't turned out to be quite the player that he thought they would be when he was drafted. I mean, he's still a decent defenseman, but he's not as high level as he was projected to be at draft time. So we'll see, but the Flames could still potentially make a move there. That's not something they are kind of forced to do. It's more of a preference that they feel could improve their hockey club if the right hockey trade is out there. Now, another team as well that's possibly making some moves as a result of some potential contracts that could be coming up would be the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes and Don Waddell have some big decisions to make, and they'd like to get some of this done before the season gets underway, and that includes contract extensions for top defenseman Dougie Hamilton, who really has played quite well in Carolina since he arrived there, and Andrei Svechnikov, who has done nothing but continue to get better and entering the final year of his entry-level deal. So he's going to be looking for a second contract and a reasonably significant raise as well. Now, the Hurricanes don't have a ton of cap space right now, but they do have a lot of expiring contracts next year, so they do have some flexibility here to get these deals done ahead of time and kind of project out next year and beyond, some extra pieces to the puzzle to be members of the core piece of the team. Now, in Dougie Hamilton's case, he's likely going to be looking for a fair bit of term. He's 27 years old, and he's been traded a couple of times, so I would not be surprised if he pushes hard for a no-trade clause. In the case of Andrei Svechnikov, they might be because of especially where the contracts are just not getting done with the long-term big money deals like the extent that they normally would because of everything going on with the shutdown, the lost revenue, and all that stuff. Would not be surprised to see Svechnikov get a decent bridge deal, 2 to 3 years, probably anything less than 4 years, because they wouldn't want to walk him right to being a free agent, like they had to do with Sebastian Aho, because they were basically forced to match that offer sheet from the Habs. But in the case of Svechnikov, probably 3 years or less would be the preferred contract. Get that done ahead of time so they don't have to worry too much about those negotiations. And obviously, if he has another big year and does even better, then he could even potentially put his price up even more. So they like to get ahead of that if they can. Now, of course, that is not going to necessarily result in these players getting traded. Of course, if negotiations go sideways, sometimes that happens. But in my opinion, I think they could be looking to move out some other money for the long-term effects of what those contracts are going to do. Now, the Canes are not going to be in a situation next year if they sign these guys to extensions that they're going to be really tight up against it or anything. They have a lot of flexibility. They also have some goaltending questions to figure out. Both their goalies are unrestricted free agents, and they have to decide how they're going to handle that beyond the current season. So those are some things we're going to see Carolina look at. But to me, if you look at some other members of the team that might not be performing so well, would be players that they would prefer to move out just to kind of reduce their long-term spending here by what they're going to have to pay these guys instead. So we're looking at like Jake Gardiner on the blue line, for example, could become expendable, or Brady Shea. They have a lot of left-handed defensemen that are making a decent amount of money. So in my opinion, between Shea and Gardiner, probably Gardner being preferred, but Shea is a possibility as well. One of those two guys very well could find himself here on the trade block if the right hockey trade comes along. And even a player like Nino Niederreiter wouldn't be surprised. His production has certainly kind of fallen off as well. And some other guys like Svechnikov have kind of gotten better through it the last year or two and kind of coming up in through the lineup and somewhat taking their spot. Even a guy like Ryan Dzingel, to me, hasn't really completely fit well with the Hurricanes as well. So difficult to say what his future holds. But I think if the contracts get done for these players, whether it's before the season or into the beginning part or at the deadline, I can see the Hurricanes moving out a little bit of other contracts just to kind of reduce their overall long-term spending here. Now, next up, I want to look at the Edmonton Oilers. There's a lot of talks that they're in negotiations to extend Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, who's making over $6 million right now. Many feel that next contract for him could be a longer-term contract to kind of keep him to be an Oiler for either all or at least a good chunk of the remainder of his career, and it's probably going to come in somewhere around that $7 million mark. Now, of course, he doesn't have a ton of time left either, and this is a situation where there's been talk about him being traded in the past, not so much lately, but a year or two ago when things were really not going as well. The Oilers have improved since the regime change, but before that, there was talk that even a player like him could possibly be on the move, mainly because he would be a player that has pretty good value. I mean, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins might not have turned out to be the player that the Oilers thought they were getting, drafting him number one overall, but he's still a really good hockey player. And if you take a look at his stats from the last number of years since he's been in the NHL, really, he's been pretty steady, pretty consistent. He's gotten better over the years. There's nothing to be upset about. He might not be that Connor McDavid type like you got with him, but still, he's been a really solid member of their franchise here and have been a consistent piece. So Nugent Hopkins, I would think, likely would not find himself traded, but if they get into a situation where negotiations really go sideways, then we could maybe see that. But we'll see how negotiation extensions go with Nugent Hopkins and Ken Holland, something that they're working on here, hopefully as well have in place before we get too far into the current upcoming season. And the other big news on the Oilers as well is the Edmonton Oilers are being sued by a Dallas hotel for a couple of bounce checks, unpaid bills, which is somewhat surprising. Looks as though they stayed there in December and again in March. Each trip was around $27,000 and $28,000. The Oilers are reportedly working with the hotel chain to settle things, but still not a good look for an NHL or any professional sports franchise when they're bouncing a check to pay a hotel bill for their team stay. I mean, clearly that's not good. I mean, if you look at March, it's when everything kind of started with COVID and the shutdown started happening. But, at that point, they wouldn't have been really losing money yet. That would have happened more after. So you can't really even blame the pandemic on that situation really at all. Like in December, there was nothing really going on, at least in North America, from that perspective. So really, it's just a bad look. I'm not sure what's going on there. Clearly something that Oilers ownership needs to rectify and quick. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the latest updates on the NHL Return to play for 2021. Now, we still don't have any real confirmed news on when they're going to get started, but the NHL and the NHLPA, even as of today, are still saying they're still pushing hard for a January 1st puck drop. And for that to happen, in my opinion at least, they're going to have everything hammered out and ironed out here probably within the next week. 10 days is probably pushing it. So by the time we hit before the end of the month, if you think about it, you need time. I mean, to start January 1st, which means you're going to start training camps around middle of December. A lot of players are going to have to return to Canada or the United States from wherever they're at. So they could be traveling between Canada and the U.S. They could be coming back from Europe. From all the players that are over playing in Europe that would come back for training camp, they're likely going to have to quarantine for 14 days before they can go to NHL training camp. So they're going to need time to know when they need to get here. So that doesn't really leave a lot of it if you don't have an agreement in place until, say, December 1st and you want to start January 1st. Well, that's pretty darn tight. You need to have it ahead of time. Otherwise, we're probably looking at not January the 1st. It's going to be a little bit after, maybe a week or two into January before you see that first puck drop. But there is still a lot of optimism on both sides. Like I mentioned before, one of the key things as well being discussed is definitely prorated salary. So they need to figure something out in that regard. The players want to get paid their full salaries. The owners likely don't want to do that. And it's a bit of an issue. So they have to figure out a way around that that's fair for both sides. And the other thing, too, that we also learned this evening was which players are on the Return to Play committee representing the NHL Players Association. So Pierre LeBrun put this on Twitter here just a short time ago. So I'll let you know here what players are reportedly involved here with those negotiations on behalf of the players. You've got David Backus, David Savard, Darren Helm, Justin Falk, Lars Ellers, Ian Cole, Zach Hyman, Ron Hainsey, who's currently a free agent, not attached to any particular team. You got Claude Giroux, Ryan DeZingle, Andrew Kopp, Alex Biega, Chris Kreider, and Winnipeg Jets forward Mark Scheifele. So some of these players were involved in the other Return to Play committee when it came to returning for the 2020 NHL playoffs. So some familiar faces in there, but obviously, we learned that tonight. He said we know that there's dialogue going back and forth every day. They're still trying to work hard to hammer everything out. And all Canadian division still appears pretty much a given. We even heard Eugene Melnick on a recent podcast talk about this concept and say he wasn't overly fond of it just because the Canadian teams have all, in his opinion, improved a lot this year, and because the Senators are still in the early part of their rebuild, didn't think they'd have a ton of success. But at the same time, like he said, it wasn't really our year. He said that the Senators are a team that he feels will be better and more competitive, but not quite to the point the other Canadian teams there. So he didn't seem real crazy about it, but understood why it might be a necessity. So, and everybody's still saying that it's almost a given that that's going to happen. So hopefully we'll get some additional news here in the coming days. There's been lots of good news coming out of the United States in the last day or two about COVID-19 vaccines as well. And even Chris Johnston on a recent interview on Sportsnet indicated he does feel that even if the NHL starts in early January, that we likely will at least get some fans in some venues, and teams wanting to play in their own venues for that purpose is likely going to be on the schedule here. We're probably going to be seeing NHL teams play in their home arenas, and obviously be able to have some fans, but that's going to depend on the local areas, what the rules are, and all that kind of stuff. But if you're looking at other pro sports and in the U.S. especially, there's certainly limited fans in other areas like the NFL and stuff. So I expect that very well could be the case. So let me know what your thoughts on everything discussed here today, and we'll discuss further down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.